am so excited to offer this session to you today. It's a very timely topic, justice versus charity. It's also a very heavy topic, right? And it's a heavy lift. But if done well, if we understand the difference between justice and charity, it can be transformational. And clearly, we need to keep transforming our communities. I was inspired to do this topic by this book, From Generosity to Justice, written by Darren Walker of the Ford Foundation and given to me by Rachel Decker, our moderator today. The book inspired me beyond belief. I was one of those nerds. I've got like pages marked and highlights, and I was walking around with it for weeks after I read it because it touched me, and it really feels timely for these crazy, polarized times of inequity and danger in our communities. Our panelists will inspire you. Our time together and our conversation will inspire you, but I also want to start and then leave the stage with this quote from this book to set your minds where we need them for the conversation. Advancing justice means addressing systemic issues, not just their symptoms. It means listening carefully to the needs of communities and giving a platform to the individuals and institutions that are closest to the problems themselves. It means recognizing that we cannot continue to merely ameliorate the conditions caused, by capitalism, but must work to strengthen and improve that market system itself, not destroy, strengthen and improve capitalism, to transform our economy, our society, and our government into structures that work for more people and create equal opportunity for all. Welcome to our session.
Please welcome President and Chief Operating Officer of Life Remodeled, Diallo Smith. President and Chief Executive Officer of the Children's Foundation, Andrew Stein. Founder and Executive Director of Equity Alliance of Michigan, Deanna Stewart. And to moderate the discussion, please welcome Founder and President of Detroit Philanthropy, Rachel Decker.
Good morning, everyone. As Margaret said, it's wonderful to see all your faces. The first session of the day on day 3 is not to be overlooked. So thank you all for joining us for this conversation. I just want to start by thanking Margaret and Delta Dental for taking an interest in this very timely and worthwhile discussion. I've gotten to know the panelists a bit as we prepared for this conversation, and our chats have been very informative and inspiring and thought-provoking, and I'm really excited to be able to bring those sentiments to you all this morning. So again, thank you for being here. All of us that work in philanthropy are keenly aware of this shift to a more trust-based philanthropic model. And for those of you that aren't in philanthropy, that just essentially means that we're allowing, funders are allowing institutions to set the path with the funds that they give them versus being overly prescriptive. So I just want to start by asking the panel to comment a little bit on that shift. Why do you think it's happening? Why do you think it's happening now?
Yeah. Well, I'll start first. Good morning, everybody. Are we all up and awake? Okay. All right. Very good. I would be remiss not to thank all of our nonprofits here, all of our foundations that are here. Thank you so much for being here this morning. It's an important conversation. I think the one cause for the shift is when you just look at our country as a whole, or the world as a whole. In some ways, you see a lot of improvements, but in other ways, you see a lot of vast disparities. And it doesn't appear or doesn't feel like those differences are coming together. And so I think the shift to a more trust-based approach from a philanthropy perspective is just a recognition that in order for us to make significant changes in our communities, in our neighborhoods, we have to entrust the people who are closest to the ground to do their best work. And so that what that shift does is it allows for the knowledge base to shift from what foundations and other philanthropic givers may see as being what they think is best, and trusting nonprofit leaders and people who are on the ground level, seeing the day-to-day realities, allowing those persons to take part in that process.
Great. Andrew?
Yeah, I think, well, thank you, Margaret, for setting up this panel. Thank you, Rachel. It's been one of the joys of being on a panel is you get to know your fellow panelists through the prep process. So really honored to be up here. You know, in some ways, I think this is new terminology to describe behavior that many folks have demonstrated for years. You know, there are plenty of funders in our community and examples around the country of people who have been putting trust-based philanthropy into practice before maybe we called it trust-based philanthropy.
Right.
So I always like to, you know, remember that there are folks who have been doing this, and I think nonprofits in particular have understood the importance of proximity to those they serve and elevating the voice of their communities and constituents. Now we've got some terminology to put around it and a framework, you know, that we read about in this book and are reading about. I think that there's been, I think, an elevated interest and interrogation into systems and structures in general over the last few years, and that includes a interrogation into the system of philanthropy. Right now, you know, philanthropy, basically we say, look, there are social problems that we value and we need to solve as a society. Government says we'll pay a certain amount towards it, and then we've got this system of nonprofits, and we say, you know, your work is important, the issue you're working on needs to be solved. Government might fund it up to a portion, and then your job is to go out and raise the rest of the money. And inherently, you've got folks who have resources and have that philanthropic capital, and the organizations that are doing work that don't.
Yep.
And I think that there's now a recognition that with those resources comes power. And trust-based philanthropy says, how do you not just shift those resources, but how do you shift that power?
Yeah. I think you have some experience with this.
I
Deanna?
do.
Yeah.
As a grassroots organization, I'm the closest to the community. So I listen, I hear what the community wants, and they trust me.
Yeah.
So once we deliver what the community has said that they wanted from us, that builds that trust.
Yeah, wonderful. So before I ask the next question, I just want to let you guys know that you've got cards on the table if you all have questions that you want to turn in throughout the conversation. So, you know, kind of building on that trust-based philanthropy model, as Margaret mentioned in her opening remarks, and, you know, as we learned from the book, there's now this shift moving kind of beyond that trust-based model where we're getting more into differentiating between charity and justice. So I just want to ask you all, you know, what does that mean to you, right? What is this next shift in the movement, and how do you differentiate between charity and justice?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And like Andrew said, some of these conversations have been happening for a while.
Right, yeah, absolutely.
Now we just have the language. I want to change a little bit of the language, because when I think about this shift, what I'm really seeing is a shift from starting with charity to moving to a place of solidarity, right? And at the end of the day, I believe that that's what people on the ground, that's what they're looking for. They're looking for people to consider them, to care about what they care about, to listen to what they have to say. And so for us, one of the things that we found central at Life Remodeled is we have to change the starting point of the conversation and the starting point of the relationship, and shift it from I'm doing something for somebody, or I'm doing something to somebody, and shift all that to we're doing it with our community members, with our residents, with our students, with our parents, and allowing for that to be the starting point of that relationship. But then, if you talk about trust, and Deanna put it so eloquently, listen, a lot of our communities have experienced levels of disappointment.
Yeah.
So there's distrust that is inherently there, right? And so, and that distrust creates traumatic experiences. And so we have to be very informed of how we navigate those relationships. And so for us, starting at the top, and so what we've done is we've made sure that our board structure, starting at the very top of the organization, is reflective and representative of the people that we serve. So we have 4 community members who are actually on our board, because we know that their information and their experiences will best guide how we approach our programmatic experiences.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's not just having people from the neighborhood involved, but also that the board looks like the consumers, right? Those are the folks that you're serving. So it's very important. Andrew?
Yeah, a few thoughts. The book makes this distinction between charity and justice,
right.
and I think the idea here, and I think we all agree with this up here, is sort of we're progressing towards an idea of justice, but that's not to say charity is bad, right?
Right, yeah, no.
You give $20, you give some money when a friend's loved one passes away. Like, that's an act of charity. It's a beautiful thing.
It is.
Amen.
Yeah.
Don't stop
And
giving.
Yeah.
Right?
Let's please give.
And,
Please support.
Everyone is starting in a different place, and I think it's an organizational journey. But before you and your organization are going on any sort of journey, it's a personal journey and personal work. And I think about that a lot. And I think a lot about what is the role of the white guy who grew up in the suburbs of Detroit in this work. And I'd be a hypocrite if I didn't say I think there is a role for the white guy who grew up in the suburbs. But sort of with that understanding, acknowledgement, and thinking, comes a responsibility of what's the appropriate role for someone like me. And in the book, they talk about 7 tenets of trust-based philanthropy, and they all resonate with me, but 2 in particular really, really do. And one is getting proximate to the work. Talk about sort of really going out, getting as close as you can to the work that you are doing or seeking to support. For me, the grand irony of my whole life is I almost didn't graduate high school because I hadn't earned my community service hours.
Okay.
Wasn't that it wasn't important to me. My parents would say, no, we instilled the values of service to the community.
You've made up for it.
Right. I just had other priorities at 18, right? But I had an experience after college where I spent 2 years working in public schools in Southeast Washington, D.C., and that was my alarm clock, and started to make me understand issues of inequity, and really started me to sort of understand my own privilege, and then with that, what responsibility. And I sort of initially felt feelings of anger and injustice and guilt, but that only gets you so far. You've got to transcend those sort of feelings and think about, as a few folks in the book talk about, once you acknowledge and recognize privilege, then how do you wield it for good? And I think about that a lot in my capacity. I'm maybe given access to spaces that others aren't. Trust might be extended my way that other organizational leaders don't get because of who I am and my background. How do I acknowledge that privilege and then use it in a way to help people move in a direction of justice?
Yeah, wonderful. We're going to talk about that a little bit more in a sec. Yeah. Deanna?
Great comment, because I often talk about when you're a grassroots small business, someone needs to be in the room whispering your name, a room that you're not allowed to get into. Charity and justice for me is about teaching a man to fish versus giving a man a fish. And that's what we do over at Equity Alliance. We're teaching sustainability.
Yeah, so in preparation for the conversation, as Margaret mentioned, we read the book by Darren Walker, which was really a powerful book. I would encourage all of you to get your hands on a copy if you can. So I think, what bubbled up for me in that book is that I think what we're realizing is in philanthropy that not only are our systems and processes exacerbating this problem of, imbalanced power, but in many ways we're perpetuating it, right? Like we're making the system almost worse. So, each of you are involved in philanthropy in slightly different aspects. So, Andrew, I want to ask you, as an anchor institution that works directly with high net individuals in our community, from a donor perspective, are you seeing your donors at the Children's Foundation embrace this trend? Are there some examples of philanthropy fueled by justice that you could maybe elaborate on or share?
I think, again, everyone is starting from a different place, right? So I think that nonprofit board service, being a donor, being part of a community of a nonprofit organization It might be one of the last places in our community where people from all different backgrounds come together very explicitly in pursuit of a common pursuit and common cause. And there's beauty in that, and there's power and responsibility that flows from that. And I think that organizational leaders have an opportunity and responsibility to educate their stakeholders and sort of move them in a direction of justice. And I'll give an example of something. So I've been in this role about 1.5 years now. 4 months in, we gathered our board and we embarked on a process to rewrite our mission and our vision. And I have some trustees in the room, so they'll remember this. We spent a half day in a conference room at the U of M Center on Woodward, where we basically wordsmithed a new mission and vision. And we had sent ahead of time a draft vision statement that had the word equitable in it. And my team and I said, oh, this is, people are gonna latch onto this. This is gonna be a thing. And sure enough, it came up right away. I love everything, but I wanna talk about this word equitable. And unfortunately, it's one of those words that has become politically charged, like so many things. But we sat there and we spent probably 90 minutes as a board of over 30 folks from every single walk of life you can imagine in this community, where we said, look, we all believe that all kids deserve the opportunity to live a healthy life, right? Oh yeah, we all agree with that. And we all agree that, different kids, through no fault of their own, are starting at different places based on their race, their socioeconomic status, where they're born, et cetera. We all agree with that? Yes. And we agree that a kid who was born into circumstances might need more than a kid who grew up in the suburbs. We all agree with that, right? Okay, that's what we mean by equitable. Okay, well, I agree with everything you said, but can we pick a different word? I said, great, what's the word to describe this philosophy that we all agree with? And we got to a point where everyone said, okay, let's use equitable, because that exactly captures what we all agree with. So, we could have avoided that whole conversation. Yeah. We could have acquiesced to the folks who felt like that word in particular was a little charged, but instead we spent 90 minutes as a board talking through this. And we probably walked 5 miles to go 3 feet in a lot of ways, but for some of those folks in the room, and to be honest, they were some of our higher net worth individuals, maybe they moved 3 feet in the direction of justice, whether
That's
they
good.
know it or not.
Good, that's a great example. So Deanna, the Equity Alliance of Michigan is a much more boots on the ground approach than Andrew. As you mentioned, you're kind of directly in the neighborhoods. So are you seeing anything different from Andrew around these trends? How are you engaging your communities?
So, yes, our community has a voice. And I think that's the key for us. We started out listening to the community. We made sure we understood what the community was saying. And then we delivered on what the community wanted.
Do you want to share some examples of that?
So we do an entrepreneur drop-in every Wednesday.
Okay.
Where entrepreneurs come to the center to get any kind of information they need to support sustainability in their program.
Okay.
We have a community garden in the community where we're teaching what we're planning, and it's open for the community. So not only are we just planning what we think, we plant what the community want, and we make sure the community know how to pick and cook what it is that's been planted.
Yeah. So
we definitely are listening and acting on what the community desires.
That's great, thank you. So Diallo, you're also embedded in a Detroit neighborhood, Yep. Life Remodeled, and I know that, taking in consumer voice into your work and your mission has really been important to you all. Can you just talk about maybe some of the lessons that you've learned over the last few years and being there?
Yeah, I want to switch the word, not from consumer to community.
Okay.
But I think that no, it's good. I want to piggyback on something you said, Deanna. I had a chance to go and visit the neighborhood that she's working in and visit her staff, and a lot of times in this space of philanthropy, what we call philanthropy, there are a lot of incredible people who are working on the grassroots level who the concept of philanthropy is not even something that they have understood because they're just doing the work.
Right, yeah,
Right?
yeah.
They're doing the work. Many of the spaces and places where these conversations about giving and receiving grants and this, that, and the other, many are just not aware that that's even a thing. And so I think that that's something that we need to talk about a little bit more critically. But for Life Remodeled, listen, yeah, I can tell you a lot of things that we learn. In fact, I can write three books, maybe even 4. But I think one of the biggest takeaways that we have is that we've learned over the years is that, listen, great intentions and good intentions are valuable, right? And all of us should have a bias for action because we want to make sure that things are happening great within our communities and our residents and our stakeholders. However, you can't move so fast that you're not actually listening to the people that you're serving. What that's going to create is a environment in which people think that you're doing something to them, right?
Yeah,
and so one of the things that we did to ensure that we are bridging that gap. So, in most places that you go to, most community centers or what have you, you have large donor walls that recognize great corporate givers, and we love our large corporate givers. Let me make sure I make that very, very clear. All right. And what we also did, because we recognized that the area in which we're serving and the building that we serve out of, it is embedded in that community, and that building means something to them. And so we had a campaign where if community residents donated $10 or more, their name was placed on a donor wall just for them. And so there was almost, we were shooting for a certain number. We got 4,922 donations. All those names are listed on this donor wall, and it reflects the skyline of the city of Detroit. And let me tell you something. From practical experience, I see this routinely. Grandmothers, grandfathers, aunts, uncles, they'll bring their grandchildren, they'll bring their nephews to come and point on the name on that wall because it means legacy, it means equity, and it means that they are invested with whatever dollar amount that they gave, 10, 15, 20, they are invested in the community in a financial way, which creates ownership in the space.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. I think more organizations should do that because, it means just as much to those families as it does to the family that's donated $1 million, right?
Absolutely.
You said the legacy and all of that. So, really at the heart of this discussion is, which Andrew kind of already touched on, is the shift in power dynamics, right? That we certainly, even in the philanthropic space, have haves and have-nots, right? That whether it's organizations that are doing the work in the community and maybe some of their executive directors have less access to capital and fundraising dollars, or, there's a variety of examples there, right, about how there's very different entities that are doing this work. So, Deanna, back to you, which you kind of already talked about, but you, on our prep call, talked about your example of instead of, giving a man a fish, teaching him to fish, but you took it even a step further beyond that. Do you want to talk about that? Do you remember?
Well, I think it's important that when we talk about charity,
yeah,
it's important that we do not make the community feel like they are a charity case.
Yep.
And over in the Midwest Tireman, where our community center is, our community feel like that's their community center, and it is. I don't have to fight the fight. The community fights the fight for us all the time. We've had folks say, why are you concerned because the neighborhood is bad? No, our community takes care of us. And I think that's the piece where you are giving and teaching and they feel it comes from an authentic place.
Yeah, so you mentioned on the call that it was, not just, again, not giving the fish or teaching them to fish, but helping them buy the boat, right?
Right, exactly.
To go out into the water, to do the fishing, to sell the fish,
And so that's the piece of it when you talk about teaching someone how to fish, whether it's our entrepreneurship program where we're teaching how to have a sustainable business the right way, how to go after funding the right way, which, sometimes gets very disappointing when we sit and we fill out the applications and the little people, we're like, we got this. And then 30 days later, it's a denial. Right. We just keep on going. We are cheerleading and encouraging. We're teaching. Yeah, we're going to have, whenever I get the opportunity, I'm whispering the entrepreneurs to funders. Hey, listen, they're over here. We're doing the work, which is not always seen in a small setting, grassroots. Folks come over to my building and they have no idea we're there. No, we're here and we're doing big things.
Yeah.
So, it's teaching and what's the process, what's the right way to do. I always say we have to be ready so we don't have to get ready.
Right. Yeah. It's a good motto. So Andrew, you mentioned earlier, about sort of using your privilege and power in trying to redistribute those, access to things and how you can leverage that. And just, the example of going into the Detroit Athletic Club, there's not everybody, even knows it's there, right? To go and to be able to be in those places and spaces. So can you just talk maybe a little bit about how you're helping to pull people up with you,
Yeah, and I think what it leads to is how do you take these principles and theories and actually demonstrate them in action? Mm-hmm. I think, what Deanna was just saying gets right to, I think, where philanthropy is headed. And, I see the folks from COACT in the room, right? And there's been, in the last few years, an intentional effort to say we're going to give grants to smaller organizations. We're going to make process less burdensome.
Yes.
I think COVID actually helped in this respect, where there was such an urgency to get dollars out the door in 2020, 2021, that foundations, companies, other funders had to let go of their process a little bit, and the 6-month report, the 12-month report, and guess what happened? The world didn't end. And what else?
Right.
The organizations use the money for the purpose that, you would expect them to fulfill their mission. So I think that was helpful. I think, we think about what are other ways that we can demonstrate what justice-focused philanthropy looks like in action, and then narrate that back to folks. So, the biggest thing we're working on right now with the Children's Foundation is, in conjunction with the opening of Michigan Central Station, and raising a fund of money that's going to be used to help build permanent endowment for 10 youth-serving organizations. 10 organizations are getting an endowment of $1.5 million. And we, from the beginning conversations with Bill and Lisa Ford, said this is about equitable, trust-based philanthropy. And we think endowment is a really great example of what trust-based philanthropy looks like in action, because an endowment is an asset of the organization. And each year it produces unrestricted revenue that the organizations can use for whatever they need. So this is not just a shift of resources, this is just a shift of control over those resources in perpetuity. So, it's doing these examples, showing these examples, but then narrating back to folks like this principle, this idea that we all, claim to sort of buy into. This is what it can look like in action. And I think there's going to be there are many more examples, and there will continue to be many more examples over the years. Like what you did with the donor wall is incredible.
Yeah, no, and I'm excited to see what happens with your project with Michigan Central, right, where those dollars go and the organizations that get selected. So, we've talked about the movement, why it's needed. You guys have shared a few examples. So, what's the next step, right? How do we go beyond moving this project forward, right? Like in educating those who control the funding, getting them to understand this movement to justice and why it's so needed, instead of being so overly prescriptive with how they're giving their funding away. So, whose responsibility do you think it is to help engage the funder community and all of that?
I think it's all of our responsibility. Right. I'll speak a little bit from just the nonprofit space. One of the things I think that we need to do a great job in is telling better stories about what's happening in our communities and the work that we're doing. And I would say that we should do it in a way that's not exploitative, because that's often sometimes how those stories are presented, right? It's from a deficit-based perspective where you have these horrible situations of people who are just experiencing just horrific situations, and those situations are present. I think a better way is to really focus on an asset-based storytelling, where we're talking about the great things that people are doing, and our support and the monies that are going towards it is helping to hyper-accelerate advancing in people's lives.
Yeah, absolutely. Andrew, do you have some thoughts on how we put the theory into practice?
I mean, again, like everyone is you're starting where you're starting, right? So don't let perfect be the enemy of good. If you're someone who has resources and, looking to give those. And then I think, nonprofits, for years were asking for unrestricted, unrestricted
They still
grants.
are.
Yeah, they still are, of course. And I think now that's like understood as, it's sort of the prevailing wisdom now. So it's going to be the organizations that are on the ground every day that are going to lead philanthropy, and raising your voice, and then funders' responsibility is to listen and respond.
Yeah, absolutely. Deanna, do you have some thoughts?
So I would like for funders to consider more grassroots organizations.
Mm-hmm.
We're out here, we're doing the work a lot of times out of our own pockets, and funders don't even know we exist. So how do we get into that room, or even invited to that room, for funders to see exactly what we're doing? I mean, for me, I'm blessed that a funder actually pulled up on me because someone was speaking my name in a room. And they gave me a 3-year commitment, general operation.
No, it's wonderful.
So I just would like, that's the voice that because I'm not the only one out here doing it. It's a lot of grassroots organizations that's listening to the people and making it happen. How do we get a seat at the table for funders to hear what we're doing?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's even, this notion of who's here in the room, right? Like the folks that can afford to come to this conference are the bigger institutions, right? Nonprofits with budgets to be able to do this kind of thing and be in this room and network with the individuals that are here. And a lot of organizations like yours aren't, can't even access the conference.
Exactly.
So how do we kind of take it out into the streets and engage these organizations that are doing really meaningful work?
Because we're connected directly to the people.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's no middleman.
Right.
Yeah, I would echo that, and I just be transparent. Listen, I always consider myself to just be a kid from the east side of Detroit, right? Who happened to be in a position to work in corporate America, specifically in corporate finance. But I'm always acutely aware of what's happening on the ground level, right? I always say I'm fluent from the streets to the C-suites, right? From the block to the boardroom. But when I look around, even in this room right now, and I know I'm very close to some of these incredible nonprofit leaders. Listen, getting here is a significant part of the operating budget, right? Just getting here, and the intention of being here certainly is to have all of these great conversations and learn, but it's also to be in the space where people who have resources to fund the programmatic work that they're doing are at, right? And so it's I don't want to reduce the efforts that many of our nonprofit leaders are doing on the ground just to be able to have an opportunity to make a presentation or to have a conversation or to have somebody else mention them in a conversation. Mm-hmm. And so I think one of the things that we need to do going forward is to decentralize some of these spaces and places where we can have these engagement opportunities in a way, to Deanna's point, that's more accessible and more meaningful. And I also think that from a nonprofit's perspective, we have to be very focused on making sure that we have data, not just anecdotes and conjecture, but true data to support what we're saying we want to do and what we've done. Yeah. We recently, the regional chamber issued a article. Gallup did a poll of 11,000 Detroiters, Black Detroiters, and those in the Tri-County area, just asking them what was their perception of thriving in their neighborhoods. And as it turned out, Indian Village was number one of the perception of thriving, which makes sense because there's a lot of investment going on in Indian Village, West Village. Housing prices are very, very high. But Durfee, which is the neighborhood that we operate in, was second, right? And so as the article was written, one of the things that they mentioned was having Life Remodeled in this particular case operate in that area in the manner in which we do, help to be able to shape people's perception of thriving in their area. But that data is important because now we can transmit that data to people who are interested and want to support.
Yeah, that's great. So, as a follow-up to that question about this sort of transfer of power and instilling trust with organizations, what do we do when trust is lost, right? I think we've all seen recent headlines. There's a few of these cards have already asked about it as well. So, while it's rare, it certainly does happen. So how do we think about, rebuilding that trust when we've lost it with our donors?
Yeah, so all three of us got together and we nominated Andy to
No.
Yes. Yes.
I'm going to steal then what you said last night.
That's fine. Steal away.
Well, we were talking about this last night, and
Yeah.
Diallo, I think, hit the nail on the head. And I'm just going to echo what you said, unless you want to say
That's
it.
fine.
And then I had another thought based on the conversation this morning. I mean, one is you're always building trust. You're always engendering trust with all of your stakeholders, right? Your staff, the community you're serving, your donors. Like, trust is the currency in which we trade in this business. These situations are unfortunate, but they're also outliers.
Right.
And I think we need to be careful to not impute sort of one outlier situation across and let that color, hundreds of organizations doing great work every day. You wouldn't apply that same mentality in the for-profit sector. Don't do it in the nonprofit sector. Mm-hmm. That's one. Two, when any relationship with a donor, a stakeholder, inevitably there is some bump in the road along the way, right? Your own relationships in your life with your partners, whatever, there's always that moment where there's a setback and that trust is eroded. And those actually become opportunities to, I think, rebuild trust in an even stronger way.
Right. And
the foundation of your relationship becomes stronger. That is about individuals building trust with individuals, but the important art in this and responsibility of leaders, and this came up, and I sought the wisdom of Ora Peskovitz this morning as we were both preparing for this. She talked about, it's kind of like when a university has named a building after someone, and then 20 years later you find out
they do something terrible.
they're a criminal, right? You can't undo the past, right? You can only move forward, and you're rebuilding trust, but you're rebuilding trust in the institution and the organization and the mission and the values that you and the donors share, and wedding them to that and tying them to that and showing them that this is an institution that you can trust, because we are all mortal, right? But the organizations we lead are perpetual, and ultimately, you need to foster that trust between the community and the institution.
Yeah, one bad actor shouldn't take down a whole organization, right? So
I think we should always remember that trust is something that's earned, not given.
Yep.
So we really do have to stop and look and say, did we just give someone trust because of a name, or did the person earn the trust?
absolutely, it's important. So for my final question, before I get to these blue cards, if you guys have any, make sure you're turning them in, is just, what do we do when we leave here, right? What's the next step? We've got a lot of organizations doing wonderful work in the room. There's some funders out there. How do we?
There are funders out there?
How do we?
I can tell you what the next step is.
Yes.
Let's have a conversation.
Right, conversation. Over at Equity Alliance, we have 3 pillars, which is entrepreneurship, empowerment, and economic mobility. So when we leave here, we're going back in June to do a community garden, and in July, we're doing a community baby shower. So when I leave here, I'm going back to do the work
Yeah.
and have conversations with funders.
Great. Yeah.
I think the key word for me, and this has always been a part of our ethos, is collaboration.
Yeah.
I think we need more collaborative efforts and discussions amongst our listen, I got the statistic yesterday. Maybe you gave me this. There are over 30,000 registered nonprofits in the Southeast Michigan area. 30,000. It's a lot, right? Many of us don't know exactly what each other are doing, but there are a lot of through lines with what we're doing. And I think finding spaces and places to collaborate and find out how we can work equitably together, I think is going to bring more impact across the board.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that this all starts with your individual journey and where you're at, and then you can look to the organization that you're a part of and saying, are we operating with principles of justice in mind? And then you can start to look out in the world and look at others, and ask that they do the same. So, start personally, think about what you can be doing within your organization. And then I would say, what Deanna, Diallo, you offer something to donors that is of value to them because you can bring them closer to the work. You can show them the work, and there's value in that and power in that. And you should, I think, remember that you've got something very special to offer folks.
Yeah, we were talking, Rachel, before. In our particular case, most nonprofits are typically serving two core audiences. You're serving your stakeholders, right, your program participants, but you're also serving your funders, your donors. And the great thing is that both want the same thing. They want life transformation to happen and to occur. Now, what neither one of them want is, what donors certainly don't want is money that's just going to go someplace and not have a dramatic impact. But guess what? Neither do your program participants and your stakeholders, your community members. So bridging that gap between the two, like you said, taking them down that path, I think is important. One of the things that we found out is that we have a large volunteer project that we do every year called the 6-Day Project, where we gather thousands of volunteers. Many of them, or most of them, are corporate volunteers to come do great work, roll up your sleeves, get sweaty a little bit. It's a beautification project. We're cleaning up blight, you're beautifying the neighborhood, but they also have a chance to rub elbows and have conversations with actual community members, right? And so that level of just reducing the bridge and bringing both of those parties together in a meaningful way has powerful impact.
Absolutely. So questions from the audience. The first one is, when you're thinking about having conversations with potential funders, how receptive to the concept of justice are they, do you feel, considering how incredibly divided our country is at the moment, right? Especially around DEI and the shifts in, that's becoming a hot topic, right? So how do you think we move this conversation forward considering that?
It's a good question. I think, and Andrew alluded to this before, everybody's at some point on that journey. I might be naive in saying this, but I just default to every human being at their core. They do want to do good stuff, do something good for somebody else, and have a good impact in the world that we live in, right? And so if that's a starting place, and I default to that as being a starting place for me personally, it's a matter of how to engage somebody to move further towards down the pathway of the mission that your nonprofit is involved with. So for us, I think really being very strong about your why and non-negotiable about your why and about your mission and what you're doing allows people a safe pathway to move from a standpoint of just charity to a stronger standpoint of solidarity. And so being very strongly focused on your mission, very strongly focused on your why, helps to navigate that pathway.
Andrew, Deanna?
I mean, I think back to the example with our board, right? Words can be politically charged, but how do you just find shared values quickly? Because I think that you can get to that pretty quickly with folks of what are we what do we both care about? What are we trying to solve? And let's come at it from that perspective.
Yeah. Great. So the next question is, asking about using the role of philanthropy in addressing data-driven disparities. It's hard to say. Deanna, do you maybe have some comments around that?
What was the question again, Rachel?
The role of philanthropy in addressing data-driven disparities.
So, interesting. From a grassroots perspective, we're in the dirt doing the work. And then someone says, hey, can you give me some data? I'm like, what kind of data? I got a picture. So I had to learn that piece of the nonprofit and understanding the importance on every time someone walked through the center, I need to be capturing data. Because somewhere I'm gonna have to explain to somebody, hey, we serve this many families. Hey, we planted this many pounds of food that fed this many families. So I think from a grassroots, it's definitely something that I've started teaching entrepreneurs because I had to learn it under fire. When someone said, can you tell me about this? Yeah, I can tell you about it because I was out there doing it. Oh, you want to see a pie chart? Give me a second. So I've incorporated that into our entrepreneur evenings to help understand, capture every single thing you do because it will matter.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just quickly, I've been thinking about just that concept of that, and to what she's speaking at from a standpoint of a practitioner that's on the ground. I also think that there are a lot of hidden data points, right? Because when we think about data, we think about numbers, we think about statistics, this, that, and the other. But there is data that is resonant in our neighborhoods and our communities that don't make it to Gallup polls, right? The Mrs. Jones, who's been in the neighborhood for 50 plus years, she has incredible data and incredible knowledge right there, right? That might not be captured in a survey or a poll, but really finding a way to have those meaningful conversations and pull meaningful data out of the minds and out of the experiences of people who are actually living in our communities is also just as centrally important as that pie chart.
And I'll just say, if a funder is saying, tell me about outcomes, tell me about data, ask for money to invest in those systems.
No, that's a good point, right? I mean, we don't
I'm going to use that one.
Philanthropy can't shy away from, we'll fund the program, but we won't fund the person to help you tell the story, or won't fund the, the software you need to track it.
I know, you're going to get a clap for that.
So what I hear you saying is that my 2 a.m. pushing keys on my computer should be a body.
And you shouldn't be.
We shouldn't, but that's reality.
Yeah.
What is more concerning to me is that how many 2 a.m.s can you do before you get burned out and then we lose the work?
This is true,
right?
But we don't stop until the funder come up and say, hey, I'm going to fund you a person to do the data 9 to 5.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Until I get that, it'll be 2 a.m.
Yeah. I think a lot of people in the room can relate.
And there have been people who have been, I think about my mother. My mother was in the social services arena for her whole life, and she, in her latter years, ran a nonprofit, and same thing. She's three-person army in the Lower East Side of Detroit, getting it done, but needing that organizational capacity building and operational capacity building to go on. But sometimes you don't even know to ask. Right? I'm not even familiar. Where do I go to get additional funding for organizational capacity building or for operational capacity building?
Okay. So this other question is kind of building off of what you mentioned, Diallo, about board composition and
yes.
Having residents from the neighborhood actually on the board. But we know that that's not always a place where people feel safe, right? Because you also talked about, trauma and people, mistrust that's happened there and injustice. So, how do organizations do that in a way that doesn't tokenize people?
That's a great question. I mean, I think obviously you have to be sincere in the ask and not exploitative, and that's a heart issue more so than anything else. I know for one of the reasons why we were really focused on doing that, and not just, quite frankly, not just our board composition, but our staff composition. It's important I think if an organization is really going to have an effective impact on a community, then the makeup of the board and the makeup of their staff should be reflective of the community that they're serving in, right? Because when you're on the ground, when you're grassroots, we are the most proximate to students, young people, older people, and they many times look for us for leadership, right? And so it's important that leadership is reflective of the communities that they serve in. So, there are times where it can be tokenized. There's no doubt about that. But one thing I know about Detroiters, community people, listen, they'll sniff out tokenism real quick. Listen, they will, and they'll tell you about it, right? Yeah. So I think building those relationships. I mean, it's one thing for me to call somebody and just say, hey, you want to come be on this board. It's another thing for me to actually spend time with that person, get to know that person, explain to them how we're wanting to build this together with somebody, and invite them to be a part of, request and invite them to be a part of that building process.
I think adding in encouragement, because there's times when a person may not feel that they can do a board position, trust, and then we have to do training. It's important that we don't just throw somebody out there to the wolves, but we provide the proper training so that they can be successful.
Andrew, do you have any?
I agree, and I would just find meaningful responsibility and power for them on the board, so that they understand why they're on the board and actually have decision making.
So this question I think is geared for you. What's the pathway to creating allies in the funding community, right? How do funders exhibit a little peer pressure maybe on their fellow funders, and how to adapt some of these practices and principles? I mean, especially some that are maybe lagging a bit behind. Do you have any thoughts about your work at the Community Foundation there and other funders?
Again, I mean, I think the ideas are going to come from nonprofits who are saying these are the values that I'm reading about in your statements you're putting out. Here's an idea that I think aligns to that, and sort of putting theory into practice and forcing the envelope a bit. And I think we found that with this campaign of raising these funds that are going to be used for endowment. Like, we met with some funders who said, yeah, but what are the organizations going to do with the money that they get each year from the endowment? Whatever they want. And it's like, you could just tell, like, they were wrestling with that, even though they've got a statement on their website about their belief in trust-based philanthropy, right? But it was like, all right, so we felt like we were pushing in a good way, and, for the most part, people were really, really responsive. I would also say, ask your funders if they'd make an introduction to someone else that would care about this work. I think a lot of funders say they want to do that. They're willing to do that. Maybe they forget to do it. But if they're asked, then they're far more likely to do it, right?
Right, absolutely.
For me, I had a conversation with a funder last night, and I said, I need you to come out. I need you not to look at me as a name on a piece of paper. I need you to come and see what we're doing. And then if you can walk away after you come and see, I'm okay with that.
Good. I'd like to know how that works out. Diallo, any?
Yeah, I think that to both of their points, I think when you for nonprofits, like when you get that first grant or that first funding, it many times it opens the doors for a lot of other opportunities, because now, because the philanthropy community talks, right? And when somebody supports an organization, it sends a trigger and a message to other foundations or financial supporters that, hey, they're okay, right? And so, at least in our experience, that's been a way. But also making sure that the relationship is not simply just a funding relationship. So, Community Foundation of Southeast Michigan, they're one of the groups that comes and serves at our volunteer project, right? And so building a relationship that goes just beyond, to your point, giving is also centrally important, because it allows for funders and foundations to have a shoe leather mentality. They're actually boots on the grounds, seeing what's happening, and it's not just, hey, nonprofit, go do your work. They're actually participating in the activity as well.
Great. So we've just got like a minute or so here left. Just maybe some final parting words, a key takeaway that you're hoping everybody walks out of this room with.
Well, one, I'd be remiss if I didn't recognize my Life Remodeled team for being here. Thank you guys. We have an incredible staff, incredible team, led by an incredible CEO. I would just, listen, big problems need big solutions. And it's going to be a collaborative, if we're truly trying to change the scope and the narrative of the state of Michigan, but specifically the Southeast Michigan region, we have to work together in that capacity. So I see this as being an opportunity for not only for more nonprofits to talk with foundations and funders about what we can do, but also for all of us in our own individual lanes to really gather together and say, hey, listen, there's big problems out there, but collectively we can be a big solution to that problem.
Yeah, great. Andrew?
There are resources out there for smaller organizations that probably aren't in this room, but maybe watching on the live stream. Like, I want to shout out COACT again as a great resource, Michigan Nonprofit Association, especially in the last few years, like the work they've done to support smaller grassroots nonprofits and building that capacity and accessing that capital. There are resources out there, and they're there.
So I just want to say, from a grassroots perspective, the work is hard. We keep doing it, and people will notice. My funder, I want to thank the Balmer Group, because they saw us.
Yeah.
They saw us and said, we're going to fund you.
Yeah. Being seen is important.
Yes. So I think, for grassroots organizations, just keep doing what you're doing, and it'll show up.
Great. Well, I want to thank you all for this great conversation, for being here this morning. Thank you again to Delta Dental and to Margaret for gathering us all together. I think for me, the important takeaway is that, this conversation is really just a starting point, right? What matters is what we do outside of this room, and hopefully this conversation continues. It really will involve the entire philanthropic ecosystem, right? There's a lot of amazing nonprofits in here doing such great work, but we need to be able to partner with businesses, with government, with our foundation friends. It really, takes a village. So I do hope that this conversation will continue. So thank you all again. Have a great day.
Masco Corporation is proud to deliver products that enhance the way consumers all over the world experience and enjoy their living spaces. Masco, serving Michigan communities since 1929. Support also provided by the Cynthia and Edsel Ford Fund for Journalism at Detroit PBS.
DTE Foundation is a proud sponsor of Detroit PBS. Among the state's largest foundations committed to Michigan-focused giving, we support organizations that are doing exceptional work in our state. Learn more at dtefoundation.com.
We help organizations find their voices through what they do and who they impact. We are VVK PR and Creative, a Detroit agency telling the stories of critical issues affecting the big picture and the small moments. stories at Skyline Heights, and on-the-ground influence. We lead with relationships first, solutions always, and with diversity as our compass. VVK PR and Creative.
Nissan Foundation, and viewers like you.